Everybody, Emily Lee here from Good Enough 444. Just doing a little car video. So I'm sitting here running errands. It's Wednesday, and I don't generally work on Wednesdays. It's kind of my appointment day, and I am just taking some notes from the book. So I'm going to talk about chapters 4, 5, and 6 in a video later tonight, but I popped back over to chapter 3 in Christine's book. Sister Wife, I love it. I think is so good. I did get the paperback copy and I got the audio version. And I listened to the audio version all the way through yesterday. I did speed it up a little bit, put it on 1.5, and then listened to it in just at my office while I was working in between customers, and then finished it up last night. So chapter 3 is titled, I know I already talked about this in my last video, but I wanted to do it a little bit more detailed. And so in chapter 3, it's called, I Believed the World Would End. I remember growing up with that feeling and just that, the world was going to end at some point. And we were just taught all of this fear. And it's so fascinating to me to read this and to compare, just some of what her childhood was like, and then also the way that she raised her kids and how that was even compared to my childhood and the way that my mom raised us. And so she talks about, she starts out talking about loving the smell of pine sol and saying that they cleaned all the time, but also that she didn't know why the house was so messy. I feel like that was so true for me and for my siblings. I feel like we did have to clean all the time, but the house was always messy. And that makes sense, right? At one point, we lived with another sister wife, and there were 15 of us kids and 3 adults living in this home. So it totally makes sense why the house would be, so messy. But kids running around, parents are working all the time, or church meetings. It seems like there was church meetings all the time. Like my dad was busy with church stuff all the time. And so Christine also talks about the fact that her dad worked in sales at a car dealership. Well, my dad owned an auto body shop, and so he did car repair work. And he kind of started that with his brother. And I think I'd have to double check with my mom, but I think that if it wasn't Christine's dad, her uncle may have been involved with my dad and my uncle at one point. And I always talk about how my dad is a used car salesman. I worked with him, so I think this is a fair assessment. He was always slinging used cars. He had a towing company, and if people didn't come and pick up their cars, or if he legitimately hung on to them for whatever loophole he found, then he could keep those cars and then he would sell them. And I remember just listening to him talk to people. People would come into his business and he would be so damn rude to them. And people would come into his business and he would just flip a switch, and he was the nicest guy you would ever meet. He knew all the right things to say. He would get people to feel really comfortable with him. And then once he got the check, that was it. He just wasn't a nice person anymore. There was nothing else that he needed to do. And he would Mickey Mouse their vehicles back together. And so I've always heard great things about Christine's dad. I'm not saying that her dad is like my dad. I just think it's funny that her dad worked at a car dealership and that my dad is a used car dealer. So she also talks about her mom making bread. And my mom has been teaching me lately how to make homemade cinnamon rolls. And oh my goodness, you guys, I think I finally got the recipe right and the way to do it. I made them at her house over the weekend and oh, they were so good. They turned out so good. I felt like a professional. They were beautiful. Maybe I'll post some pictures of them. So she said that her mom exuded the cool vibe. Her house was the party house. 100%, that was how my mom was, and I see Christine that way too, like, she's always just so fun, and she's funny, she's got this great sense of humor, just a really good personality. I'm gonna read one little tiny paragraph. It says, "In fact, mom loved to bend the rules, especially to accommodate joy. Our fundamentalist church opposed everything from pierced ears to Christmas. Some people didn't even celebrate birthdays." So I remember that as a child, we shouldn't get our ears pierced. I didn't get mine pierced until I was 13 or 14. And it was actually my Christmas present that year. My mom kind of went all out on Christmas for us kids. And I don't remember how she got some money right then. And so she did really fun Christmas for all of us. My younger sister and I got packs of earrings and we got to go and get our ears pierced. And my dad was not happy about that. So I think it must have been at a time when my mom just was doing her thing. So I love though that her mom was the cool mom too. I always remember her mom being incredibly kind. I remember walking over to her house multiple times after school and her mom feeding us snacks and stuff, my older brother and I, and just really being such a sweetheart. And Christine's younger sister was a blast too. We had a lot of fun with her, and she just really had a good sense of humor. And I've often heard my older sister Melanie talk about the Allred sense of humor. And it really does run in that family. They are just a really funny family, which is awesome. She, talks about the holidays, and some people didn't celebrate Christmas. We always did. Have lots of pictures of us. We would celebrate it with my dad's other wives. And so we always got together at one of the wives' houses on Christmas Eve. We would do a big sleepover. And then we would all get up and do, presents and Christmas. And we got to have Captain Crunch for breakfast. The moms always made a really big breakfast. And for the most part, we would get like one present each. We would draw names, and each one of us kids would get to pick a different sibling. And that was always a lot of fun. So she talks about Halloween is considered good family fun. So people go all out monsters, cobwebs, pumpkin line, every sidewalk, hordes of children. Mormons have lots of children. Trick or treat in the Latter day Saint wards where everybody knows everybody and there's no fear of razor blade laced apples or apples because handing out apples for Halloween is rubbish unless they have caramels on them. So we had a neighbor, and actually their last name was Brown, and they handed out caramel apples. And so we loved it to go to the Browns and get a caramel apple and a cup of hot chocolate, and they just lived a few houses down from us. So we loved to trick or treat. I don't ever remember my dad on Halloween until I was in my late teens, early 20s, and at that point, if I saw him on Halloween, it was at Melanie's house. Melanie was having a Halloween party. Melanie and Corey go all out. They decorate their house, their yard, their front porch is always super cute. They love to scare, and so they do these big giant Halloween parties, and they are a ton of fun. We have a blast with those guys on Halloween. And then she talks about her other mom lived in the other half of a duplex. Her grandpa lived in another little house in the same area. Okay. So she talks about we used to call it the compound, but only among ourselves. Now, this compound still exists. And it's a big property with lots of different houses, duplexes, apartments. And actually, my grandma, so my dad's mom married Owen Allred. So she was married to Owen Allred, to Christine's grandpa. And so my grandma lived on that duplex. So we would go out there a lot. I remember going out there for plenty of different occasions and also going there just to see my grandma. And so that just made me laugh to read that they called it the compound, but only among themselves. The Allreds started out with, I think, a lot of property in Murray, Utah, and then a big portion of that, I think, got sold. They ended up building a mall in that on that ground that they had sold. And then they ended up out in Bluffdale, which was like the end of the road for the valley here, way surpassed that now, but it was way out there to go to Bluffdale, to go to that compound. I love the way that she explains what her mom was teaching. I feel like this book is so good. It's been a great book for me that, really hearing Christine's truth and listening to her answer a lot of questions that we have asked over the years of watching Sister Wives. It's been so fascinating. And then just to compare the way that she was raised to the way that we were raised, it's been really cool. So, but she talks about how she says, my mom wouldn't say it this way, but don't be a jackass. Yeah, my mom would say that. She would say, don't be a jackass. She believed no one religion was better in God's eyes than any other, which went against our churches and most churches' teachings. As far as I could tell, she believed in our faith, but she was also a bit of a feminist. I think my grandma may have been too, which is not unusual in polygamy. I come from a long line of divorces, which to me says more about freedom and strong women than it does about dysfunction, though we certainly had our share of that. They would have been surrounded by other strong women growing up. My perspective on that is not necessarily freedom, but coercive control. I think there is so much coercive control in this group. I think there is so much coercive control in each individual marriage. I think we watched it play out for 15 years. Cody was coercively controlling all of these women, and you just don't realize it. You don't realize it until you're actually an adult and you've got more life experience. And then you finally can start to see, oh my gosh, I was raised in a cult and these things aren't true. I don't believe this way. I think these men learn how to mirror the women's emotions. And so really you just go through these cycles. They're love bombing you and then they're taking away their love to punish you. And then they're coming back when they need you and they're love bombing you again. And so you just see that in the majority of the marriages. I mean, I do know of a lot of really good people, and yet I look at the situation and I just think you guys have no idea. I don't even have an idea completely of all the aspects of abuse that went on. And I don't think that any of these women fully realized the scope of the way that they were being abused. I think this book really acknowledges what a lot of us fans and viewers have been saying for years now. She says in our church that we can marry who we want and there are no underage marriages. Now, Mel and Corey just did a live and I was listening to them explain this, and it's like, yes, you get to choose, but if you're only given so many choices, are you really choosing? If it's option A or option B, hell, maybe you even have option C, but you're given those options. And so you're having to choose from what they're giving you. That's not choice. That's not freedom to necessarily go out and fall in love. And I know that that's not happening in every family or every situation in the AUB. It's happening a huge chunk of the time. The dads are really kind of pushing and guiding where they want their daughters to go. And I know a ridiculous amount of men that have traded daughters, that have bartered their daughters. I fully believe wholeheartedly in the AUB, women and children are property. Women are a form of currency. They're a number. It's a numbers game in their heavens and in their hierarchy. You've got to have at least 3 wives in order to be on the council. I think you've got to have 5 wives for some certain ceremony. And then in order to be the prophet, you have to have 7 wives. And that just comes with a ridiculous amount of responsibility and children. So I have to disagree with Christine on this. And again, I think how much has she fully processed the scope of abuse, and how is she on the things that have happened? And yeah, she also does talk about later in the book why they left the AUB. And part of that was the new leadership. And so that makes sense. It makes sense. Like, I look at my dad and I think there's no way in hell this man should be leading 10,000 people. And I think a lot of people left the church when my dad became the prophet because they knew he wasn't a good man, but not all of the people know that. And so they're still following him, and he is God's mouthpiece. She says her mom would say, why don't they look at these men as individual men? How do they run their families? What kind of dads are they? We looked at families that ran well and talked about why. Yeah, why are some families running well, or their version of well? The Browns were one of the top families that people looked at and admired, that people looked at and said, yeah, we think if anybody can go on TV and show the goodness of polygamy, it's going to be the Browns. Well, maybe Cody was a different person for those first 16 years until Robin came in. And unfortunately, a majority of the time, a man ends up with a Robin. So had they kept it just those 3 wives, it's still so sad. And wait till we get to chapter 4, you guys. Oh my God, chapter 4 broke my heart. I have like the entire chapter highlighted. I'm just, wow, I cannot believe what we're going to end up talking about in the next chapter. But I think there's just so much that still needs to be unpacked. So she also talks about these 3 ladies that led their Sunday school and youth classes, and they filled us with terrifying lessons about the end of the world. And that stuff was taught. The doctrine that was taught out of the church was very scary. It's not normal. You don't teach children to fear all of these things at such a young age. So I don't necessarily know that these adults are intentionally wanting to cause problems or harm the kids, but that is what's happening. They're being taught to fear so many of just the normal things in our life, and talking about the end of world times and the problems that come with that. Our bodies aren't designed to handle that kind of stress. The amount of health conditions that come from those mental gymnastics you end up doing when you're just filled with these terrifying end of times lessons, and, the earthquakes and the fires and the locusts and all of these things that they teach, some from the Bible, but the majority from the Book of Mormon, which I think a lot of that is pulled from the Bible. It's terrifying. So she's saying she knew the world was going to end in her 15th year of life. These ladies were very specific about it. She was told they didn't need to worry about going to college. Who needs an education for the end of times? So like, you're being taught that as a woman, you don't need to go to college. They're teaching you from 12 years old. I look at my little 11-year-old daughter. She's going to be 12 in January. I cannot imagine talking to her at this age about becoming a wife and a mother. And those lessons start at 12 years old, girls' class. So they bring these girls in. And this is where I really struggle with the concept of live and let live. These are consenting adults. okay, they're consenting adults, but they're creating a horde of children and they're teaching these children these terrifying things. And then at 12 years old, they're grooming them to be wives and mothers. That I remember as a really small child, probably 6, 7, 8, wanting to be a teacher and then wanting to be a police officer and then ultimately wanting to become an attorney. Just since I was really little, I've always really wanted to be a lawyer. I would love to go to law school, and that's just been since I was so young. And then we moved in with another sister wife when I was 8, and that sister wife taught me so many scary things. I remember she was a storyteller and she was pure blood. She was born and raised in the AUB, and she just taught the scary, scary, scary stuff. And so at that point, I wanted to be a wife and a mother. Those were my goals. I was going to grow up. I was going to get married to a good man, and he was going to work really hard and be a good provider. And we were going to have lots of babies. And I was going to be a wife and a mother and just sacrifice myself endlessly until the end of my life, never really figuring out who I am, what I want, what I like. And now we're getting to kind of watch that unfold with all of these wives. We're seeing Christine and Mary and Janelle. They're each one picking a different path. They're going their separate ways. They're dressing differently. They're styling their hair differently. They're starting to become individual women. And there's nothing individual in the AUB. It's cookie cutter, copy and paste. It's the same shit. And it's awful. I think it's awful. So she says, I worried I would be found lacking and that I would burn in hell and that it would all happen before my first kiss. So here she is, this 14-year-old girl, knowing that the world is going to come to an end when she's 15, and she doesn't think she's been a good person. She thinks she's going to burn in hell. So ultimately, she does go to her dad, and her dad's like, what are you talking about? And she says, well, that's what I learned in church. And he's basically like, you're going to college. You can't live your life in fear. So she says she trusted her dad. He believes you should never burn a bridge. You should always maintain good relationships with people. God, how I wish that my dad taught that. How I wish that my dad lived that. The amount of bridges that have been burned with that man, he's burned them with the majority of his children. 90% of his children he's burned his bridges with. And he's only got a couple of wives that even see and speak to him. And if he's maintaining a relationship, he's maintaining that relationship because that relationship is beneficial to him. He's getting something out of that relationship. He needs that person in some way, some form. It's feeling something in his ego, or it's a beneficial relationship, maybe physically. So he says, look, you just got to prepare yourself, live your best life. You just have to believe in Jesus. You need to treat people like you would want them to treat you, like Jesus treated people, and then you were going to be fine. In the meantime, the church ladies didn't stop preaching that I should prepare for the eternal flames of hell. So, despite all of that, she still believes it, right? Finally, I told my mom. She freaked out. She made a couple of phone calls, and the ladies disappeared from our Sunday school classes. Polygamy PTA. The church leaders themselves continued to teach end of times from the pulpit. I didn't know what was real. So that's how she ends chapter 3. So yeah, just after going back and just kind of rereading some of it, I'm like, oh my God, there's so much in here that just pops out to me. And chapter 4 is so hard, you guys. So I'm hoping that I will be able to sit down tonight when I'm done with all of the errands and volleyball games for my little one and film about chapter 4 maybe chapter 5. We'll see. I was going to do chapters 4, 5, and 6, but chapter 4 might need its own video. It's so sad to me. The things that come out in this chapter have me sick for Christine, have me enraged for Christine, and enraged for just all of the women that are stuck in this exact same situation. They're just repeating this cycle, and it breaks my heart. I think that there should be some penance to pay. These men should be held accountable, and they should not be able to do these things to these women. Like, guys, this shit's been going on for 100+ years, and they have not figured out the things that they should tell people, the things that they should warn people about. What is happening? It's a cult, and we need to figure out a way to help these people. So, in the meantime, we're going to talk about what goes on and point out some of the abuses. And, it's inevitable. I'm going to compare these things to the way that I was raised and some of what I was taught and just some of the things that happened, you know, to me, while also really just enjoying the truth that Christine has finally brought to the table. I'm sure that Cody and Robin are pissed. I think they are probably pissed. This book really acknowledges and solidifies all of the internet sleuthing, so many questions. I listened to Christine be interviewed on the Sarah Fraser show, and she says that they're already talking about book number 2 and what's going to be in that. This book has been out, what's today? The 3rd. So its official release was yesterday. And I can't wait for book number 2 to be written. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoy my videos, please like them and subscribe so you get notified when I put more content out. And I really look forward to a long, fun journey with all of you. I look forward to getting through this book with you guys. It's exciting, it's fun, and I think it's answering a lot of questions that a lot of us have been asking for a long time. So I will see you guys soon.